On the night of October 18, 1962, a young husband and wife set out on a small boat near Shell Beach, Louisiana. Somewhere on that dark stretch of river, his wife went into the water. He says he dove in after her. He says he never found her. Her name was Mary Horton Vail. She was 22 years old, a school teacher, a new mother. For 12 days, search crews dragged the river. On October 30th, they found her, floating almost exactly where her husband said she had fallen. It should have been a simple, devastating story. An accident, a grieving widower, a community in mourning. But almost no one who knew this couple believed that's what it was. The coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning. The very same examination recorded a scarf stuffed into her mouth, a deep wound on the back of her head, and a body that had already gone stiff before it ever touched the water. Weeks later, the district attorney declined to prosecute. No trial, no jury, the case was closed. Her husband walked free. Over the following 50 years, he would marry 4 more times. 2 more young women who loved him would disappear, one after another, in 2 different states, and for most of 5 decades, almost no one would connect any of it. There are letters that don't add up. There are journals he never meant anyone to find. There's a private investigator who would one day pretend to fall in love with him just to bring him down, and a little boy, only 8 years old, who once tried to tell police the truth, decades before anyone was ready to listen. It would take 54 years, 4 police jurisdictions, 2 journalists, and 1 mother who refused to stop searching for her daughter before this case ever reached a jury at all. But before we dive deep into this story, please let us know where you are watching from. And if stories like this interest you, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. To understand how a case like this could slip past investigators not once, but 3 times, it helps to understand the world this happened in. In the early 1960s, a small Louisiana parish had no shared database with police departments in California, Oklahoma, or North Dakota, a drug arrest in one state, a missing persons report in another, a drowning ruled accidental in a third. To the agencies involved, these looked like unconnected, isolated incidents, handled by different detectives in different decades, with no way of knowing the others existed. It was also a system in which a single district attorney's office held enormous, largely unchecked power to decide a case simply wasn't worth pursuing. In 1962 alone, the same judge who handled this case dismissed 882 other criminal matters. That isolation, between states, between departments, between one woman's story and the next, is part of why the same pattern was able to repeat for 50 years, before anyone could see it as a pattern at all. Felix Vail grew up on a dairy farm in Montpelier, Mississippi, one of 5 children. By the time he graduated high school in 1957 and moved to Louisiana for work at a chemical plant, he had already built a reputation. Tall, blue-eyed, always behind the wheel of a new car or the handlebars of a motorcycle, he was, by multiple accounts, dating roughly 20 women at once. One acquaintance later put it simply, the man seemed kissed by heaven. Mary Horton was, by every measure, someone with a future ahead of her. A former homecoming queen, a sorority member, a student at McNeese State University, she met Felix in 1960. It did not take long for the relationship to sour. She told friends she still loved him, but no longer liked him. She tried dating other men, hoping he would simply leave. When she confronted him about it, his response was strange enough that she repeated it to others. The problem, he told her, was her. There was at least one documented incident of physical violence between them. And yet, in July of 1961, they married anyway. Mary became a 2nd-grade teacher. Soon after, she became pregnant, a pregnancy Felix made clear he did not want. In the months following their son's birth, the household took on an unsettled quality. A door was found with its hinges removed. Mary reported threatening phone calls, but only on the nights Felix was away. She considered leaving him. Her mother, deeply religious, urged her to stay and try to make the marriage work. On the evening of October 18, 1962, Felix and Mary took a boat out near Shell Beach. Felix later told investigators they were running trotlines when Mary fell overboard into the Calcasieu River. He said he dove in after her and could not find her in the dark water. For 2 days, search teams worked the river without success. On October 30th, 12 days after she disappeared, Mary's body surfaced almost exactly where Felix said she had gone under. She was buried the following day. Felix was arrested days later and refused to take a polygraph test. Investigators noticed a small but telling inconsistency. He described Mary as wearing a white leather jacket that night. No jacket was ever recovered with her body. The autopsy told a story the official ruling did not. Mary's body showed bruising on her head, neck, and legs. A scarf was found wrapped around her neck and pushed into her mouth. Despite this, the coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning. The district attorney chose not to pursue charges, and within days, Felix was released. For Mary's family, the case was over almost before it had truly begun, and the man they suspected had killed her was, in the eyes of the law, simply a grieving widower. In the years that followed, Felix moved through life with a freedom his first wife never got the chance to have. He took his infant son, Bill, to live briefly with relatives in Mississippi before relocating to San Diego, often instructing family members to mislead anyone asking where he was. He began a relationship with a 17-year-old named Robin Sinclair. When she became pregnant, he vanished, only to resurface later and be turned away. It was in San Francisco that Felix met Sharon Hensley, a young woman in her early 20s. The two began traveling together, with 8-year-old Bill in tow. According to Bill's own account, he overheard his father tell Sharon that he had killed Mary. Bill did something almost no one expected of a child his age. He went to the police himself and reported what he had heard. This is the irony at the center of the case. The truth had already surfaced once, spoken aloud by an 8-year-old boy directly to law enforcement. Officers in California did follow up, but only far enough to arrest Felix on an unrelated drug charge. The information about Mary's death was passed along to authorities in Louisiana. Nothing came of it. Felix served a brief sentence, and life continued. By 1972, family members noticed a troubling change in Sharon, a different way of carrying herself, a deference to Felix that her own brother would later describe as resembling someone who had been brainwashed. In 1973 and 1974, her contact with family grew increasingly erratic. Plans to travel to South America, and finally, letters from Felix, inconsistent accounts of an Australian couple Sharon had supposedly run off with. The names of this couple changed, depending on who was telling the story. Sharon was never heard from again. Felix married twice more in quick succession. A teenage bride named Sharon Campbell had the marriage annulled after learning from his own family about Mary's death and noticing scarring she found deeply unsettling. A second marriage, to a woman named Carolyn, ended after he was caught cheating. A relationship with another woman, Alexandra, ended in a physical attack, stopped only when her brother intervened. Then, in 1981, Felix began pursuing a 15-year-old named Annette Craverer. Over the next several years, the pattern repeated with disturbing precision: a forced abortion, eventual marriage once she turned 17, and, after she inherited roughly $100,000 from her late father, the steady transfer of that money and her family's property into Felix's name. In October of 1984, Annette disappeared. Felix's account of her departure contained a detail investigators could not verify: a bus station in St. Louis that did not exist. Detective Dennis Davis questioned Felix twice. The story did not hold together. The case was closed anyway, the third disappearance connected to this man treated, once again, as an isolated event. It was Annette's mother, Mary Rose, who refused to let it end there. She confronted Felix directly. She hired a private investigator. And in 1991, during a conversation with Felix's own sister, she learned for the first time that there had been a first wife who drowned, and a second woman named Sharon who had vanished the same way Annette had. Mary Rose connected with Mary Horton's brother, Will, who confirmed what Bill had reported as a child decades earlier. For the first time, someone outside Felix's immediate circle could see the full shape of the pattern. A brief surge of momentum followed in 1994. A new private detective, renewed interest from 2 jurisdictions, even Bill's agreement to testify. And then, for reasons that remain unclear in the public record, the case stalled again. Years passed. Annette's family held a memorial for her in 1997. Bill grew into adulthood, built a career as an engineer, married, and started a family of his own, all while carrying the weight of what he had tried, and failed, to make anyone listen to as a child. In 2009, Bill was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. Before he died, he recorded a tape, laying out in his own words what his father had told him about killing Mary decades earlier. The tape was played at his funeral. Felix did not attend. When he learned of its existence, he demanded the pastor turn it over to him. That recording reached journalist Jerry Mitchell, who began building on the work Mary Rose had spent years assembling. He discovered that police records related to Felix's past relationships had gone missing. In 2012, Jerry and Mary Rose visited Felix's trailer in Mississippi and found machetes and swords inside. Felix's own sisters told Jerry they believed he had killed all three women. The evidence accumulated quickly after that. Friends of Mary's described the boat Felix claimed to have used that night as entirely unsuited for running trotlines. A doctor in New York reviewed Mary's original autopsy and concluded the injuries were consistent with asphyxiation that occurred before she ever entered the water. A former detective noted something investigators had overlooked in 1962. The fishing tackle, the trot line, even Felix's cigarettes were all found completely dry, despite his claim that he had dived into the river to save her. A detective who once led a homicide task force concluded that Felix matched the profile of a serial offender, but left the unit before the case could move forward. It went cold once again. When Jerry's article was finally published, it reached a national audience. It detailed not only the suspected pattern of deaths and disappearances, but evidence from Felix's own writing suggesting a sexual interest in children. The article brought forward new witnesses. A former co-worker recalled Felix saying, of Mary's pregnancy, that he had fixed her so she would never have another child. A relative discovered that Mary's death certificate contained fabricated details and a forged signature. Records showed Felix had taken out 2 separate life insurance policies on Mary before her death, and had never paid for her funeral. Perhaps most damning were Felix's own private journals, which contained a personal philosophy of life and a written admission of being drawn to children. Even with all of this, when police brought him in for questioning again, Felix denied everything, blaming the families and the media, and was released. It was a private investigator, Gina Frenzil, who finally tipped the case toward resolution. She built a fabricated romantic relationship with Felix, secretly recording their conversations and photographing thousands of pages from his journals. Through that relationship, she captured him acknowledging knowledge of having killed before, and recorded his visible anger whenever Annette's name came up. On May 17, 2013, as Felix attempted to sell the Tulsa property and appeared to be preparing to leave the area, he was tracked to Canyon Lake, Texas, and arrested. He was found living in a storage shed. He was charged with only one murder, Mary Horton's. There was still not enough evidence to bring charges in Sharon's or Annette's disappearances. The trial began on August 8, 2016, in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Felix was 76 years old. 54 years had passed since Mary's death. Prosecutors built their case around the original investigative findings from 1962, much of it ignored at the time. A coroner's testimony explaining that Mary's body, rigid and crossed at the hands like someone laid out in a coffin, directly contradicting the original ruling of accidental drowning. They presented the hematoma on the back of her head, the bruising on her body, and the scarf found in her mouth, which a forensic psychologist testified could not have ended up there on its own. 3 separate men testified that Felix had personally admitted to killing Mary. Gina Frenzil described her undercover investigation and Felix's reaction whenever Annette was mentioned. The defense maintained that Mary's death was a tragic accident and that Felix had tried to save her. They challenged the credibility of the witnesses and argued the case should have been tried decades earlier, when the original investigators were still alive to testify. They also suggested that Sharon and Annette might still be alive somewhere, simply unaccounted for. In closing, the prosecution offered the line that captured the entire case. A man cannot be the unluckiest person alive 3 separate times. The jury deliberated for 33 minutes before returning a guilty verdict. In the aftermath, prosecutors disclosed something that had never been part of the public record. An FBI investigation had confirmed an earlier act of child abuse, one that could no longer be prosecuted because the statute of limitations had expired. At sentencing, Mary's brother Will addressed Felix directly, telling him there was no decency in him and that he was headed toward a reckoning he could not escape. Felix, even then, insisted Mary's death had been an accident and asked for leniency. He was sentenced to life in prison. His appeal, arguing that testimony about Sharon and Annette should never have been allowed at trial, was rejected. He remains incarcerated. From prison, Felix has continued to claim that Sharon and Annette are alive, simply unreachable, a claim that has never been substantiated and that has closed off any further path to learning what actually happened to either woman. Justice arrived for Mary Horton 54 years after her death, long after most of the people who fought hardest for it were gone. Her brother, Felix's own son, Bill, who tried to tell the truth as a child and spent his final months making sure it would be heard, even if he would not live to see a verdict. For Sharon Hensley's family and Annette Crayraver's family, the conviction offered a kind of validation, but not an ending. No remains, no charges, no answers about where either woman is or what happened to her. Some who knew Mary have suggested, without confirmation, that there may be others connected to Felix's history that have never come to light at all. What remains is a single conviction, decades overdue, and two disappearances that may never be solved, their full truth resting with the one man who has never told it.